3 months ago, I got word that my uncle had passed away. We weren't especially close, but he left me one of his houses in his will. I felt touched by the gesture, but honestly, all I wanted to do was sell the place and move on. I'm a relatively new dad to twin girls, and I didn't need anything else adding to my plate to speed things along. I decided to head across the country and stay in the house until I could finalize the sale. My job only requires a laptop and a phone, so I was lucky enough to get approval to work remotely for the time being. Unfortunately, my wife couldn't take time off from her job, so I had to go alone at first. I treated the trip like a little getaway. I figured I'd be done in about a week, but it turned out to be way more complicated than I expected. I hired a realtor to handle most of the heavy lifting, but even after a month, I was still stuck there. Right from the start, strange things started happening. Stuff didn't stay where I left it. I'd catch glimpses of shadows out of the corner of my eye. Time kept slipping away from me. I'd blink, and whole chunks of the day would be gone. I chalked it all up to stress and feeling isolated. Except for the realtor stopping by now and then with potential buyers, the house was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. Just when I thought I was losing my mind, the neighbor showed up with a dog. She was an older lady who explained that she'd been taking care of the dog while my uncle was in the hospital. Now that I was there, she figured I should take Buster, a big golden retriever, off her hands. The neighbor seemed a bit off, though, like she thought my uncle had just passed away the week before. Still, I couldn't help but fall for Buster right away. His presence was exactly what I needed, and I even started imagining him as a perfect surprise for my girls. I just hoped my wife would agree when the time came. But even Buster could sense that something was off about the house. While he quickly settled into his new home, he absolutely refused to go upstairs. At first, I didn't mind. It made it easier to keep an eye on him. Then, one day, Buster vanished. I swear. 1 second he was standing behind me while I was opening the treat jar, and the next, he was gone. I had only glanced away for a moment to put the jar back on the shelf, but when I turned around, he wasn't there anymore. Panic set in as I tore through the house calling his name. The layout wasn't complicated. The kitchen opened into the living room, which connected to the master bedroom and a small study. The other side of the kitchen led to a dining room, and from there, you could enter the front hall that looped back to the living room and the staircase leading upstairs. Upstairs, there was a balcony that overlooked the living room on one side and the front hall on the other. Heading left, you'd find a guest room and a game room. Going right, there were 2 more guest rooms and a bathroom at the end of the hall. I checked every single room, but Buster was nowhere to be found. The doors and windows were all locked, and there wasn't a doggy door in sight. Somehow, he must have gotten outside. I searched the neighborhood for an hour, calling his name, but there was no sign of him. Frustrated and worried, I started thinking about making flyers. When I finally opened the front door to head back inside, I heard the sound of paws scrambling toward me from the kitchen. There he was, Buster, running straight to me like nothing had happened. I was relieved but completely baffled. How could I have missed him? That night, I let him sleep in the bed with me. Looking back, it was a bad idea, but at the time, it felt comforting. Work picked up after that, and I managed to push the weirdness of the house to the back of my mind. I was on a roll, landing one big contract after another. I worked non-stop, taking calls and crunching numbers, knowing it would all pay off with a promotion when I got back to the office. There were nights when I'd get so lost in my work that I wouldn't even notice it had gotten dark outside. I'd be so focused that I wouldn't hear Buster whining for dinner or to go out. To keep myself on track, I started setting alarms, but even then, I couldn't afford to slow down. I had too many important clients depending on me. I was riding high, but my body was starting to pay the price. I'd forget to eat, and sleep was an afterthought. There was always another task to tackle, another client to talk to. Oddly enough, I got better at caring for Buster than I was at looking after myself. That high came crashing down with an actual bang. No exaggeration. Buster had been whining behind me while I wrapped up a spreadsheet when we both heard it. A door upstairs slammed shut. For the first time since I brought him home, Buster bolted upstairs on his own. My first instinct was to call the police, but standing there with the phone in my hand, I started second-guessing myself. Maybe I'd imagined the noise. Besides, if someone had broken in, surely Buster would have barked his head off. Trying to shake off the unease, I grabbed the closest thing I could find, a frying pan, and decided to check it out myself. The upstairs was dim, but the moonlight streaming through the downstairs windows gave me just enough light to see Buster. He was standing stiff as a board, tail straight up, in front of the bathroom. That's when I noticed the door was wide open. I knew for a fact I'd closed all the doors earlier when I was searching for Buster. Yet here it was, swung open like someone had just walked through. I reached for the hallway light switch, but nothing happened. Great, just what I needed. With no better plan, I raised the frying pan like it was a sword and crept toward the bathroom. The bathroom didn't have a window, so it was pitch black inside. I was shaking, every nerve in my body on edge. Buster, though, he was frozen solid. He didn't bark, didn't growl, just stood there like a statue, staring into the dark room. Weirdly, that gave me a sliver of courage. If Buster wasn't losing it, maybe things weren't as bad as they seemed. Steeling myself, I stepped into the bathroom. My eyes had mostly adjusted to the dark by now, and the space was so small that I could immediately tell there was no one hiding in there. I started to relax, until I felt something sticky under my foot. That's when it hit me. I had my phone in my pocket. I yanked it out and turned on the screen to shine some light on the floor. The second I saw what I'd stepped in, my stomach dropped. Surrounding my feet was a pool of bright red liquid. I was so freaked out that I dropped my phone right into the mess. I didn't stick around to figure it out. I bolted down the stairs, and Buster followed right on my heels. This time, I didn't hesitate. I called the cops immediately. Thankfully, there was a patrol car in the area, and 2 officers showed up within minutes. Their flashlights sliced through the shadows as they checked the upstairs. Turns out, the bathroom lights were working just fine. They also found the source of the blood pretty quickly. According to them, it was just rusty water from a busted pipe. I didn't believe it at first, but they convinced me to go back upstairs. Sure enough, in the bathroom under their lights, the puddle was a muddy brown color. The slam we heard must have been a pipe breaking. The officers had a good laugh at my expense, but were kind enough about it. They even recommended a plumber. Unfortunately, my phone was toast from being dropped in the puddle, so I'd have to use the old landline in the kitchen. After they left, I promised myself I'd call the plumber first thing in the morning. But despite how tired I was, I couldn't sleep after all the excitement. Instead, I stayed up working on a few documents for the office. Hours later, I noticed Buster had made a mess in the living room. I was completely drained and snapped at him, said some things I shouldn't have. Worse, I acted out of frustration in ways I regret deeply. That moment made me realize just how much stress I'd been carrying. The next morning, I reached out to my supervisor and explained the situation. To my surprise, they were incredibly understanding and offered me the week off to recharge. Just like that, all my deadlines and responsibilities were lifted off my shoulders. With work out of the way, I made Buster my main focus. I spent the day playing games with him, feeding him treats, and trying to make up for my earlier behavior. That's when I found the first message. It took me a while to notice, but I realized I'd been avoiding the second floor altogether. That's when it hit me. I hadn't actually called the plumber yet. Before doing so, I figured I'd check if the situation upstairs had gotten any worse. But what I found made my blood run cold. Scrawled in red on the hallway wall was a message, "Losing your mind?" For a moment, I thought I really was. The realization hit me like a freight train. Someone had to have been inside the house. Maybe they'd snuck in while I was asleep. What I did next isn't worth repeating. Let's just say I didn't exactly rise to the occasion. Eventually, I unlocked my bedroom door and made my way down to the kitchen, with Buster leading the charge. Shaking, I called the police again. Thankfully, the same 2 officers from before arrived quickly. Together, we cleared the house, inch by inch. Yet, once again, we found no one. Every window and door was locked tight. No signs of forced entry. To my surprise, the officers took me seriously this time. They admitted there'd been a string of strange break-ins in the neighborhood, cases where nothing was stolen, just weird occurrences like mine. They offered to have a patrol car sit outside my house for the night, and I gratefully accepted. Even with that reassurance, I knew there was no way I'd be sleeping in the house that night. So I called the only friend I had in the area, an old college roommate who, by some stroke of luck, lived just 30 minutes away. He didn't hesitate to offer help and said he'd pick me and Buster up in a couple of hours. I spent the time packing up a suitcase, unsure how long I'd be gone. I threw in just about everything I'd brought to the house. When he called to say he was outside, I didn't waste a second. I hung up, ready to meet him at the door, thinking he could help me carry my stuff out. But when I got to the driveway, it was empty. No car, no friend. Confused, I called him back. He insisted he was parked right outside. I heard him step out of his car, walk to the front door, and knock. Then I heard a door open, but not mine. An older woman greeted him, and my friend asked for me by name, even mentioning my uncle. The woman said she had no idea who he was talking about. After apologizing for the confusion, he left, still on the phone with me. I told him I must have given him the wrong address. But when he repeated the one I'd given him, it was correct. Determined to figure this out, I walked out to the street to check the numbers on the curb and mailbox. But there were no numbers. Instead, painted in red on the curb was the same message as before. Losing your mind? I wanted to run, to leave everything behind and just go. But I couldn't abandon Buster, and I still needed my things. So I steeled myself and went back inside one last time. When I got to my room, my heart sank. The suitcase I'd spent an hour packing was now empty. Everything I'd packed had been neatly returned to its original spot. I tried to block out the impossibility of it all and focus on what mattered, getting Buster and getting out. I clipped on his leash and was startled to see how haggard he looked. I promised myself I'd make it up to him once this nightmare was over. I tried to leave through the front door, but it wouldn't budge. The knob turned freely, but the deadbolt wouldn't slide back. Panic crept in, but Buster's presence grounded me. Kneeling down to hug him, I felt his wet tongue on my cheek, and an idea struck me. Whatever was happening, it wasn't the work of a human intruder. Still, I needed to outsmart whatever force was keeping us trapped. I walked to the sliding glass door in the back and said aloud, "Well, Buster, time for a walk?" The door slid open without resistance. Buster shot out like a rocket, thrilled to finally be outside again. I followed cautiously and took a moment to examine the backyard. It was enclosed by an iron fence, but a tree had grown too close, with branches extending over and through the bars. That was our escape. Buster didn't need any encouragement. He slipped through the gaps in the fence and waited for me on the other side. Climbing the tree was no easy feat. I was painfully aware of how weak I'd become from my sleepless, stressful lifestyle, but I managed to pull myself over as I climbed down on the other side. Buster let out a single growl before bolting toward a nearby hill. I scrambled after him, my heart pounding. The hill was steeper than I expected, but someone had thoughtfully laid stone bricks into the slope, creating a rough pathway. I followed, desperate to keep up. It was a steep climb, and I had to concentrate on my footing to keep from slipping. My focus was so sharp on the ground that when I reached up and my hand landed on carpet, I froze in confusion. Looking up, I found myself at the second-floor landing of the house. I glanced down to see the staircase leading to the entry hall and living room below. Buster was gone, nowhere in sight. Feeling utterly defeated and drained, I crawled up the last few steps and just sat there for a while, calling for him now and then. He didn't come. The sound of the kitchen phone ringing startled me, and I suddenly felt a flicker of hope. Maybe whoever, or whatever, was toying with me couldn't stop outside help. That I scrambled to my feet and hurried downstairs, only to trip and fall hard onto the cold tile floor. I lay there, stunned, but quickly pushed myself up and ran for the phone, and my wife's voice greeted me, warm and familiar, flooding me with relief. She sounded worried, asking why she hadn't heard from me. I struggled to remember the last time I'd even tried to call her. She mentioned that my job had been calling her, concerned because I hadn't shown up in over a week. A week? I said. They gave me time off because of the stress. Didn't they tell you? Her tone turned more serious. Honey, I don't think so. You've been gone for 9 days. The weight of her words hit me like a freight train. 9 days? How had time slipped away like that? But I didn't have time to dwell on it. I needed her help. Listen, I said, my voice shaking. Call the police. Tell them to come here. Tell them my uncle's name. I think I'm in trouble. I don't know what's happening, but I think I might need an ambulance. She started to say something, but her words were cut off by a mocking tone I didn't recognize. Does your tummy hurt? The voice taunted. When's the last time you ate? I wonder what Buster tastes like. I slammed the phone down, my heart racing. My stomach churned, and I realized the voice was right. I hadn't eaten in who knows how long. My thoughts were interrupted by a faint, pitiful whine coming from upstairs. Buster. Ignoring the pain shooting through my battered legs, I rushed up the stairs. The hallway was worse than before. The words "losing your mind" were scrawled everywhere. Walls, ceiling, floor, and some of them were still dripping fresh blood. I didn't even try to deny what I was seeing anymore. Buster lay in front of the bathroom, curled up and weak, looking thinner than I'd ever seen him. I scooped him up, my arms trembling under his weight, which felt heavier than it should have been. A banging sound erupted from the front door, making me flinch. Then came a voice, a man's voice, calling out that it was the police. Relief washed over me as I recognized it as one of the officers from before. I called out, "I'm upstairs," and tried to make my way to the stairs, clutching Buster close. But the hallway before me seemed to stretch endlessly, growing impossibly long with each step. The officer called out again, but this time, another voice answered him. A woman's voice. My wife's voice. "I'm sorry," she said. "My husband's not feeling well. He's resting in the bedroom. Can I help you?" I screamed with everything I had, trying to let the officer know I was there, but it was like my voice didn't carry. I could only listen as he replied, "I'd still like to check on him, just to be sure." The voice pretending to be my wife didn't miss a beat. "Of course," it said. "Come on in. He's right through here." It was like being trapped in a nightmare. Sweat poured down my face as I trudged forward, but every step seemed to get me nowhere. The hallway stretched endlessly, mocking my efforts. I tried to move faster, but the more I pushed, the further it seemed to go. Then, out of nowhere, a blood-curdling scream echoed from downstairs. A man's scream. The hallway snapped back into place, and I suddenly found myself standing at the top of the stairs. Before I could stop my momentum, I tumbled down, hitting the steps hard and landing in a heap at the bottom, on top of Buster. He let out a sharp, agonized howl, but at least he was alive. Relief mixed with guilt as I scrambled off him, my heart racing. That's when I noticed the thick trail of blood leading around the corner and under the door to my bedroom. The blood was still wet, pooling at the edges. And there, beneath the door, was a shadow. Something was moving in there. Ignoring the searing pain in my body, I crawled to the kitchen and grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, my old frying pan. With it in hand, I crept back toward the bedroom, my steps slow and deliberate. My eyes stayed glued to the shifting shadows under the door, every nerve on edge. Whatever was in there had killed someone. That scream left no doubt. And if it could kill a man, it could kill me. But if it could kill, it could also be killed. I clung to that logic as I raised the frying pan, ready to strike. Carefully, I reached for the doorknob. The second my fingers brushed it, the door flew open with a crash. Something lunged at me. Without thinking, I swung down hard. But it wasn't a monster, it was the cop. He stood there, a knife buried in his chest, a strange, frozen smile on his face. My hand was still gripping the knife's handle. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I just stared as he crumpled to the floor. I stumbled backward, collapsing onto the now pristine hallway floor. The blood, the shadow, it was all gone. My mind reeled. I was sure I had picked up the frying pan. I remembered its weight in my hand. But now, just as clearly, I remembered pulling that knife from the kitchen drawer. My heart sank as the realization hit me. I was losing my mind. When I looked down again, the knife was back in my hands. I dropped it instantly, the clang against the floor echoing in the silence. Crawling on all fours, I made my way back to Buster. He wasn't moving. I pressed my head against his flank, desperate to feel some sign of life. But there was nothing. His body was still warm, but his chest wasn't rising. He was gone. I don't know how long I stayed there, frozen with grief. Time seemed to blur, and eventually, I found myself on the living room couch, staring into nothingness. The house was quiet now, eerily quiet. I waited there until nightfall and then fell into a restless sleep. When I woke, the silence was still complete. I stayed on the couch, waiting for something. I wasn't sure what, but as long as nothing happened, I didn't want to make the first move. But the bodies were still there, Buster and the cop. I couldn't just leave them like that. My stomach growled, pulling me from my stupor. I needed food, and I needed to bury them. Out back, I found an old shovel in a small outdoor closet by the porch. Digging the hole was harder than I thought it would be. I was exhausted, so I decided to bury Buster first. I'd deal with the cop later. Picking up Buster's limp body, I carried him to the shallow grave. His fur was still warm under my hands, and it broke my heart all over again. Those big brown eyes, always so full of life, were empty now. Gently, I laid him down and covered him with soil. When it was done, I wandered back into the kitchen, hollow and starving. The silence followed me, clinging to every step I took. It was so complete that I wondered if the ghosts had finally stopped tormenting me. Maybe, I thought, all they wanted was to turn me into a murderer. Now that they'd succeeded, maybe they'd leave me alone. I pulled open the pantry and grabbed the first thing I could, a box of cereal. Pouring a handful into my palm, I brought it to my lips. Then I froze. How could I even trust what I was eating? What if the cereal in my hand wasn't really cereal at all? What if I'd unknowingly opened a box of rat poison? I had no idea what these ghosts, or whatever they were capable of. My mind conjured horrible images of the food transforming into worms, writhing in my mouth. The thought made me gag. I hurled the cereal to the ground and stormed off, hunger forgotten. My focus had to shift to one thing, getting out of this place, and then, as if on cue, I passed by the front door. It was wide open. I froze. Instinct took over, and I lunged for the door. But I stopped short, my hand hovering just a foot away. My heart pounded in my chest. This had to be another trick. I could already see it slamming shut in my face. Or worse, taking a few of my fingers with it. A cool breeze drifted in from outside, teasing me with the promise of freedom. But I couldn't bring myself to step forward. Everything about this house defied reason. My senses had betrayed me over and over again. But the longer I stood there, the stronger the pull became. Finally, my legs moved, and I stepped outside. The sight of the cop car in the driveway stopped me cold. It was just sitting there, as if waiting for me. The door was unlocked, and the keys were in the ignition. My mind raced, scrambling for answers. Had the cop been some kind of lunatic? Maybe he'd murdered the previous owners of this house. Maybe his death had somehow set the spirits freed. I couldn't make sense of it, but I didn't care. I shoved my doubts aside and climbed into the car. The engine roared to life, and I pulled out of the driveway. My heart soared as I left that cursed house behind. The sun was shining, the sky was clear, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt free. I kept driving. Left turn, right turn, left turn, right turn. I had no idea where I was going, but I didn't care. The open road stretched ahead of me, and I reveled in the sensation of escape. But then I noticed something strange. There were no other cars on the road. None. The streets were eerily empty. Where was everyone? Where was I? A sinking feeling crept over me, heavy and suffocating. My chest tightened, and I slumped back into the seat. That's when I noticed the change. I wasn't in the car anymore. I was sitting in an armchair. My stomach dropped as I looked around. I was back in the living room of my uncle's house. My arms were still raised, gripping an invisible steering wheel. I let them fall, trembling with frustration and rage. Tears welled up as I staggered to my feet, a scream ripping from my throat. How long had I been sitting there like a fool, pretending to drive? How long had that grin been plastered on my face? I turned and spotted my work laptop glowing on the dining room table. It was open, the screen staring back at me like it was alive. Something was already written there, waiting for me to see it. Lost your mind? Good. Now you won't mind losing the rest. My blood ran cold and my hand suddenly felt heavy, and I looked down to see a kitchen knife clutched in my fist. I dropped it with a clatter, my breathing ragged and uneven. I stumbled to the laptop, desperate to erase the message. My fingers fumbled over the keys as I tried to type something, anything, asking for help, but the words didn't come out right. Every keystroke felt wrong, like someone else was controlling my hands. Slowly, another message appeared on the screen, letter by letter. I'm sorry. I've disappointed you all. For the last time, goodbye. I stared at the words, frozen in place. As the screen glowed brighter and brighter, I wanted to scream again. But something was different. I wasn't in the dining room anymore. I was in the study. My hands moved on their own, scribbling words I didn't recognize at first. Then, slowly, my own thoughts began to emerge. I've been writing. Just writing and writing. I've sent emails pleading for help, posted desperate messages on the local police department's Facebook page, and reached out to anyone who might hear me. But the writing never ends. It's all I can do to hold on to whatever's left of me. Whenever I stop, I find myself in another room, with new horrors waiting for me. Once, I opened the study door and saw a hellscape stretching out before me. Lava bubbling, smoke choking the air. I nearly stepped out, but something made me slam the door shut. Was it real? An illusion? I didn't want to know. I just sat back down and kept writing. The more I think about it, the less sense any of this makes. I don't even know if this is about ghosts anymore. I've started questioning everything. For instance, I can't seem to remember my uncle's name, or his face, or anything about him. Really? Did I even have an uncle? And how did I get here? Did I fly? Drive? I can't recall. Have I always been here? Even stranger, I can't picture my realtor. I've met them several times, but their face, their voice, their name, it's all blank, and now, it's getting worse. I can't remember my daughter's names, or my wife's. Am I even a father? Am I even a person? I must be. I'm here, aren't I? I'm writing this, aren't I? But when I try to think about my parents, what they look like, how they sounded, it's like pulling at fog. My childhood is nothing but static. All I know is this house, this place, and the nightmares that fill it. It's like I'm back in that cop car, moving forward without knowing where I'm going, or if it even matters. This isn't living. I'm so tired, so hungry. The voices are louder now. They're all around me. I can't stop writing. If I do, I'll disappear. I know it, but my thoughts are unraveling, slipping through my fingers like sand. My hands ache. My mind aches, so tired. A, B, C, D, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z. The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. I need to keep going. Keep writing. But I'm losing track of what I'm saying. What's my name? I don't know anymore, and if I stop, it's over. If I stop, I die. A, B, C, E, R, G, H, I, K, L, M, N, O, Q, P, R, S, T, U, V, W, Y, X, A, and D, Z. The quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dogs. Dogs. Buster. I miss Buster. I wish I could pet him again. Just once. But was he ever real? Was any of it real? I need to focus. Focus. The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy. Goodbye. The quick brown I'm sorry jumps over pointed you lazy dogs. Goodbye. I'm quick. I've jumped this app. Disappointed you all. Lazy dogs. Goodbye. I'm sorry that I've disappointed you all. For the last time. Goodbye.